everyone. Hi everyone. Paul Faris here at Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and welcome to our very first live event. I'm really excited about this and happy to welcome you here. Now, we're going to be talking obviously about the Loyola case at the Supreme Court that came out let's see, time's flying, Wednesday or Thursday this week. And yeah, answer all your questions. We did do a video actually in the Supreme Court at the time that it came out, about 4 or 5 minutes long, giving you the basic outline. So today I want to flesh that out a little bit and then spend actually most of my time answering your questions. So I've got a little screen here beside me where your questions will pop up as we go. And do feel free to ask questions as I'm talking. I may not answer it immediately, but then I know sort of the questions that you have and that are coming up. And so I can either work that into what I'm sharing or I can answer it right away. So we'll talk about that. And of course, you can, the best place if you're on the Google platform is to ask right in the live event there on Google. You can ask questions, but you can also do it on our blog. If you're not a Google user, you can feel free to ask questions on the blog, and I've got that up in front of me as well. And I'll be able to see those questions. So yeah, very exciting case, and one that I was very happy to be involved in. So just to step back a little bit and give you a little bit of an outline of the case once again. As you know, the case came out of Montreal in Quebec, and that is a place where there's obviously homeschoolers. But it's also a more difficult place to homeschool because the government has not necessarily been super welcoming to homeschooling. And a lot of that, I think, just comes from an ignorance and a misunderstanding of how homeschooling works and how effective it can be and is out there. And so what tends to happen is they tend to try to force what happens at school to be mirrored at home. And often that will be things like multiple exams per year based on the curriculum taught in the school. And so one of the core questions, one of the core arguments we've always had has been on how much homeschoolers have to mirror what happens in school. Now, if you're a homeschooler listening to this, you'll know that homeschooling is not just school at home. It's a very different thing. And that difference, that ability to customize to the child and to the family and all these different things is really a huge part of its success and strength. But that hasn't always been understood. So in Quebec, the Section 15.4 of the law out there is the one that allows homeschooling. And it uses this word equivalency, that you're allowed to homeschool if you're providing an educational experience that's equivalent to what provided at school. And we've always said that doesn't mean the same. It's not an identical program somehow replicated at home. It's something that is equivalent in outcome. I mean, we would say better, but sort of equivalent in outcome that maybe reaches some of the same goals or a list of goals, but doesn't have to be exactly the same lesson on the same day or the same test or even necessarily the same curriculum, right? So that was, I say all this because that was a key part in this case, because in this section, the private school had to provide equivalent instruction. And so they asked for an exemption from the ethics and religious culture course on the basis that their course was equivalent to it. And the minister denied that, saying it wasn't equivalent, and really used a definition of equivalency, which meant the same. They said it wasn't the same. And so that was a key point that came up in the arguments, and one that we made very strongly when we intervened at the Supreme Court. So just to give you a quick idea of how that process all worked, when the case first came up, it was Loyola, which is a small private school for a boys-only private school in Montreal for high school. And it applied for this exemption from the ethics and religious culture course on just a few small points, and applied to the Minister of Education in Quebec. That application was denied. They then took the case and brought it before a judge, and the judge agreed with Loyola. Then it was appealed to the Court of Appeal, which agreed with the province, and then it was appealed to the Supreme Court. And that's once we saw it go to the Supreme Court, and we'd been tracking this case really right from the beginning. And because we were so aware of the implications right across the country, because once you're at the Supreme Court, that applies to the whole country, but also with equivalency wording and freedom of religion and education, we knew that this case was going to be quite possibly the most important case for homeschoolers in the country that we have. And I do believe it probably in many ways is the most important case for homeschoolers in the country right now. So that's why it was so important for us to intervene. And obviously we did that. That was almost exactly 1 year ago. It was March 24th. I was just looking at it, that the arguments were given to the Supreme Court. And now just about a year later, we're hearing the decision. So certainly ask any questions as we go along about that decision, because or about the appeal process, or about Loyola, because there's a lot to this. And the funny thing with courts is they make a decision based on the decision of the lower court. So they're not just making a ruling about the whole situation. They're asked a very specific question in a very specific context, and their decision is applied to that fact scenario. And this is a case with a very specific fact scenario. And I think in the future, cases like this will be very dependent on the fact scenarios. So so that's something to keep in mind, and something I'm happy to answer questions about as we go along. So to the decision. So the court looked at it, and actually overall, I think it was a very balanced decision. They really did look at the interests of the province and of all the provinces, and said, the province has an interest in education. But then they also said, but freedom of religion is also a really important thing. And so the province can't just trample over freedom of religion in pursuit of whatever goals they set for education. And in this case, they looked at the ethics and religious culture course. They looked at the law in Quebec, and they said, well, actually, government of Quebec, you're actually violating your own legal setup, because the laws in Quebec do recognize that parents have the right to choose the educational path for their children, that public school or private school or homeschooling are 3 legal options in Quebec that's recognized in the law, and that parents have the right directly in the law to give their children an education that is in accordance with their religious beliefs. And this was really all ignored in many ways by the decision of the Ministry of Education with Loyola. And it's one of the reasons why I was so glad that they actually did challenge it legally, because it really needed to be challenged. So so yeah, the court looked at that, recognized those sections, pulled out those sections in the judgment. And I've got the judgment here. It is, fairly thick document with really 2 key arguments. You've got the majority decision of 4 judges and the minority of 3. So it's you have to, if you do decide to read it yourself, be aware of that. But really the court took out those sections, said, yeah, these are legitimate sections you have in your law, and you failed to carry these out. And because you did that, not only because of your local law, but also because of the charter, which guarantees freedom of religion, Quebec government, you violated the freedom of religion of the Loyola students and of Loyola itself. So very, very valuable decision for us, because really what they're recognizing is that freedom of religion is alive and well in the educational context. They very directly said that parents have the right to pass on their religion to their children through an education system. One thing to be aware of, they did say in the majority that a government can require an education system, whether that be homeschooling or public or private, to teach about different religions, for example. So they did uphold the ethics and religious culture course, but they said that it's appropriate for a government in requiring those things as goals that they not be so specific that they violate freedom of religion. So what does that mean practically? It means that they could say you need to teach your children about different religions, but that the government can't necessarily, or it doesn't have to be equivalency and that word would allow parents to teach that in a different way, so long as the goals of the program were met. It doesn't have to use the exact same curriculum. So that's very important, because obviously as homeschoolers, we agree with the goals of education, that we want to educate our children well. We just want to do it differently. We want to do it our own way. So that was very good. So yeah, I think I'm going to end my overview with that and take any questions that you may have about this case. Now, feel free to ask in terms of just the case in general, but also in terms of individual provinces. So if you're wondering, how might this apply to me, feel free to ask those questions. Well, I guess I've done a really good job of answering everyone's questions. I'm not seeing a lot popping up here beyond the basic congratulations and that sort of thing. I do want to step from this case into just thank those of you who have supported us in doing this, because, litigation, I'm on staff, but litigation, and it is necessary to hire lawyers. It's an expensive process, and it's a very time-consuming process. And that we've only been able to do this because of the support of our members of HSLDA. And for those of you who have donated to CCHE, this was a case that was funded by CCHE, which is Canadian Centre for Home Education, and a charity. And for those of you who gave to that, that allowed us to do the case. And it's really exciting, because as we're seeing some of the great stuff being done in homeschooling, the great work you guys are doing, and the necessary, really for our country, component of homeschooling, and what great citizens it's producing. And you can see all that research on our website. It's so important to make people aware of this as an educational option. And so that's one of the things CCHE wants to do as well, is really to get the word out about education, and then take cases like Loyola in the future, because it's important that we not just take good laws for granted, but protect them zealously, and be willing to make sure that any court hears the truth and hears the perspective of homeschooling, so that good laws are made. So thank you for supporting us in the past. I encourage you to do that continually in the future, so that we can continue to get good decisions, hopefully, and engage on this process. So unless any questions come up, I am going to end this session. Certainly, you're always welcome to give us a call at the office here. It's 519-913-0318, or email us at info@hslda.ca and ask your questions, or certainly problems. That's what we're here for. And as for those of you who are our members, you'll know that we're just a phone call away for any problems you have in anything having to do with homeschooling at all. So, all right, well, thank you, everyone, and we're going to end the session there.